Morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to actually be together on Zoom. Thank you for joining us here, wherever you are. This morning, as I was preparing in prayer, I thought two questions came up in me from the last time we were together. And they were, how am I doing practicing what I preach? And the two things that came up were wearing life like a loose garment and laughing more. And the other one was, am I loving my life? And so those two questions came up and I realized, wow, I am laughing more and I'm grateful for that. And in the spirit of Charles Fillmore saying that if we don't laugh enough, our bones could get dry and brittle. Here's my joke practice for the day. Get ready. So it's all about a Zen master. And maybe you've heard this joke and I have, but I wish I could remember it to use it more consistently. So I'm practicing, okay? So a Zen master approached a food truck and with this order. He said, hi, make me one hot dog with everything. So it was a hot dog truck. And so the vendor prepares the hot dog and he hands it to the Zen master who pays with a $20 bill. So the Zen master asks, where's my change? And the vendor responds, change must come from within. Okay, so if you thought it was funny, then you're on maybe the same wavelength as me, which is to be conscious, deliberate, awake, and aware about staying on the path to illumination. And so here we are together on this path, and I'm inspired by the following scripture. I'm inspired by it because in Unity in August, we dedicate our studies to the spiritual faculty of will. I'm inspired by it because the King James Version is the one that I kept hearing quoted by a teacher I've been listening to a lot. And if you're interested, it is the King James Version that I'll be sharing from this morning. And it's just a curiosity to me that the George Lambsa version, I would say digresses significantly, and I don't know why, but this is how I've been hearing it the last month. And so I share with you Psalm 138, verse 8, which says, the Lord will perfect that which concerns me. Simply, the Lord will perfect that which concerns me. Wow. So in right use of our spiritual faculty of will, I guess the first step for me to review is how well I am yielding the personal will in terms of that which concerns me. Now, I do not hear concerns in that scripture as anxiety. I hear it as whatever is my business. Some of you will remember from Byron Katie's work, she teaches us that there are three types of business, and that's it. And if we just check in with these three types of businesses, I have found it easier to align my will with the divine and not fall into my personal will. She teaches that there's my business, there's your business, and then there's God's business. Mine, yours, and God's business. And a really good question that brings me back to where is the use of my spiritual faculty of will? Is it yielded? Is it surrendered? Is it allowing the will of the divine? or am I right in there? And if I'm in your business, or if I'm in God's business, either way, I am not aligned or allowing the will of the divine to have its way, to guide me and to direct me. I'm inspired by the hymns that Jackie chooses for us. And I saw it as speaking to me specifically when I saw the lyric, I keep the will of God uppermost in my mind. So in terms of the Lord will perfect that which concerns me, I suppose what we did the last 2 Sundays was to look at our own business as individuals, as souls who have come here to get what we came here to get. One of the earliest lessons in this philosophy we love called unity that transformed my life was the invitation to accept 100% responsibility for the life that I'm experiencing. And I can tell you, it works if you work it. I love my life because it is not coming from within my small self. It is the life of God, the will of God. And so in coming together on Sundays, this is going to be our 3rd time looking at an Eastern philosophy, which it outlines 7 steps to gradually living in the light. By the way, do you like this picture? Because I got it on my brief walk this morning. I saw a lamp. I love lamps, just because they are light. But you know what? I think it's really cool if we think of ourselves as lamps through which the light of God shines. And then how about all that shining in that opening hymn too? So coming back to looking at our own business, taking 100% responsibility for our inner landscape and being willing to examine ourselves, I came across this true statement, which you've probably heard a million times in truth circles, which is that the unexamined life is not worth living. But that's Socrates, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. But maybe you have not heard this 21st century. I guess I think of it as an addendum to the unexamined life is not worth living. And it goes like this. The unlived life is not worth examining. And so we come together on Sundays to celebrate the fact that we are living our lives to the fullest capacity possible. And I'd like to share this with you, inspired by Epictetus. That's not right. Let me say it again. 1st century AD philosopher Epictetus, who says, there is no substitute for a life well lived. Soul cannot be felt or expressed through a life that is in shambles. There's no substitute for a life well lived. Soul cannot be felt or expressed through a life that is in shambles. The kind of inner security and continuity that a carefully, and I would say consciously, lived life offers is its own reward. Yes, it is. And so we come together this morning to examine our inner landscape in the light of those last 3 steps, which promise us will lead to greater and greater illumination of our beingness. And so we're going to look at stages 5, 6, and 7. And what I would like to do is to start by giving you the heading for each of the 3. And then we'll go back and look at what are the symptoms that we call them symptoms of health. Okay. What are the symptoms that indicate to me that most of the time I'm in stage 5? What are the symptoms that indicate to me that I have perhaps moved into 6? And how am I doing in my consistent willingness to move in the direction of stage 7? So 5 is cosmic consciousness, and I only got to mention that last time. The 5th stage is cosmic consciousness. The 6th stage is something that a bunch of us have been hearing a lot when we listen to Joel Goldsmith. The 6th stage is God realization, realizing God. And of course, the last stage is illumination or enlightenment. So I like to stop and notice when a phrase in a truth circle recurs in such disparate places. So, years ago, Joel Goldsmith focused on realizing God. You can talk about God, you can study God, you can read it, or you can sit and have a realization of the presence. There is no accident in a philosophy that is 6,000 years old from the Far East, which the Fillmores often dabbled in. There is no coincidence in the fact that the 6th stage that precedes illumination would use the very same words, God realization. And certainly, in these last 3 phases, what I hear most, and perhaps it will speak to you as well, is that the time spent in contemplating God and our oneness with God, the time spent daily dedicated to prayer, silence, meditation, really, really shifts in these last 3 stages. And so if during this wonderful, whatever it is, 18 months of shift on the planet as a whole, you have been blessed, as I have, by a conscious decision to sit in contemplation more frequently every day, then perhaps these last 3 stages and what they say about the power of prayer, the meaning of silence, and the importance of contemplation will speak to you, as I know it really, really does to me. So here are some of the characteristics, right? Some of what I have called symptoms of health, because if I can look at myself and notice that I am living in the 5th state of consciousness, I will notice that consciousness or awareness or attention given to my small self has diminished, and it diminishes a little bit every day. Wow. Do you know what, guys? Those are probably enough lessons or topics right there just for the rest of this year to look at how to continuously diminish my focus on my little self and to just sit and realize God, right? Because that's where the ego thrives, is in the stuff of the little self. And so when we're in stage 5, titled Cosmic Consciousness, we notice that our consciousness of events, circumstances, I call them hooks. Jesus, the master, called them temptations, right? I notice that those hooks that would bring me to my small self diminish. They're just not showing up with as much time as I'm choosing to sit in prayer, in silence, in meditation or contemplation. So that's really the first symptom of living in the 5th state of consciousness, cosmic consciousness. Now, here's the second symptom or indicator or sign that we have at least entered the 5th consciousness, is that we are able to apprehend the whole universe okay, all that we can conceive of. We're able to apprehend the universe as an interaction of cosmic forces, all dimensions, all aspects of it emanating from God being. And so we improve our ability to apprehend the whole universe. Some of you heard me say in a meeting this week that we apprehend the universe as an interaction more of cosmic forces whenever we lift our vision. And that's a full-time assignment for me, lifting my vision to the within, or I go without. Second, so we have really two characteristics or symptoms of stage 5 of cosmic consciousness. The first thing is that I'm less interested in the seduction, the hooks, the appearances and the circumstances that the small self is meeting in the world of appearances. I'm less and less interested in that. Self, small self, more and more called to sit and realize God more often. And the second symptom of health, that I'm in cosmic consciousness, is that I can actually behold, apprehend, conceive of the entire universe, everything, every little rock, hill, and stone, every leaf, every breeze, every planet. And by the way, if you had a crazy couple of nights with some of those outer circumstances, you probably know it's a full moon. Right now, it peaked around 8:02 a.m. this morning, Eastern Standard Time, and it's a blue moon, a very rare moon. And so we bless the ability to apprehend that the moon is part of God's universe and that all of the cosmic forces are emanating from God as source. Finally, what I promised you about each of these 3 stages, speaking to or commenting on or suggesting what's going on in our contemplative silent times, our prayer lives, our meditation times. Here's what to look for when I'm determining how consistently I'm staying in the 5th stage of cosmic consciousness when it comes to my prayer life. Meditative perceptions or realizations in the quiet seem in this 5th stage to always come back to oneness, to seeing wholeness. And this is what I love about Jesus's language, because in the language of Psalm 138, verse 8, which said, the Lord will perfect all that which concerns me. The word perfect or perfect in scripture has caused a lot of people needless suffering. It has really led to people hurting themselves, especially any of us who in the past may have had a predilection for perfectionism. In Jesus's Aramaic, okay, which is the spoken language and also the language that would inform Psalm 138:8, the Lord will perfect, or perfect, adjective or as verb in Jesus's language. It carries the meaning of rendering or returning to a state of wholeness or completeness. So for me, that's really important, that when I'm in the 5th state toward my spiritual unfoldment, the 5th stage of cosmic consciousness, I can pay attention to what's going on in my prayer life in the silence when I'm sitting, not trying to stop the mind, because that's an impossible assignment. I'm just willing to sit and listen and wait for a God realization. The 5th stage of soul unfoldment is characterized by realizations and perceptions during the quiet that transcend judgments that are perceptions. And so those judgments and perceptions fall away. We're just not even having them. We're not even tempted by them or hooked, because what's going on in the fifth stage is that we are having perceptions and realizations that are transcendent. And of course, that is a very important adjective. To transcend, once again, is to rise above. And so they are transcendent in giving us the vision within of the oneness that is the perfection that the Lord will ensure about everything that is my business, the business of my soul. So just to recap the fifth stage of cosmic consciousness, during this fifth stage, the universe is comprehended as a manifestation of Godness, is how I think of it. So the whole universe can be comprehended as manifesting God. It is God self-expressing, if you will, in space, in time, in even every little fine little cosmic particle. And that's kind of how I hold the name of this fifth stage in my mind during prayer, is to think of it as cosmic particles, every single infinite one of them emanating from God. Remember the first two Sundays when we looked at the first four stages? After we looked at characteristics, we noticed in the Eastern tradition, what are relationships like in these stages? How do the activities we choose shift? And so in this fifth stage, every activity of our life, every single relationship is enjoyed with higher understanding. It's probably been almost 28 years since I first heard a unity talk that said, I'm always going to look for the gift. And sometimes, folks, it's really not a gift the way we think of it. But let me tell you something. It is a call up higher to seek the lesson that is so wanting to emerge from this external circumstance, relationship, experience. And so I give thanks to God right here in the context of the community that I love for the countless invitations that I've gotten just during this full moon to enjoy with higher understanding those outer things and recognize that what I want to do is say thank you and see them as gifts custom made for my soul. Suddenly, in this fifth stage, ignorance, selfishness, or indifference about others' welfare just ceases. What we have instead is compassion, a new kind of selflessness, and these two things become very influential if we are living permanently in the cosmic consciousness. We go naturally toward compassion and selflessness. These, I call them emotions. You call them what you want. This urge, this feeling of compassion and selflessness around everyone in my life are life forces. Compassion, selflessness. I feel them as life forces that flow from my soul without interference. And what happens when I allow compassion and selflessness to flow is that it removes other restrictions to my spiritual growth from my small self, from the personal will, from the personality, and eventually it transforms even my physiology, allowing it to sustain a more refined, more transcendent understanding of life. So are we pretty good with the fifth stage, cosmic consciousness? Okay, well, because the last two, holy mackerel, maybe they're calling to you as they are to me more and more every day. The sixth stage is, as I said in the introduction, the stage of God realization. If those words do not really land on you in a deep, meaningful way, then I sometimes take them in as a liberation of consciousness, small self consciousness. And when I realize God, I am at one with the oneness that defines me. So let's look at the symptoms of being so healthy that we might live in this sixth stage of spiritual growth illumination. What happens? Well, the influence of mental conditioning of any kind is weakened or gone. So I guess an assignment right here to help us determine if we've ever been in stage 6 or if we might be now. This is what I do, is I ask myself, so what are the mental conditions that I wish to see weakened or gone, right? Because if the 6th stage is characterized by an influence of the mental conditions lessening or going away completely, what are those mental conditions? Well, folks, you know what? Truth is truth, no matter how it's expressed or how it emerges. Mental conditioning is anything that happens in the mortal mind. So that's self-flagellation, distrust, fear. These are all aspects of fear, but the ego has fear that is designed to specifically seduce us, which is why we can only be in charge of our business. And so the influences of those mental things, perception, judgments, old patterns, that's all mental conditioning. And if we're in the 6th stage, they're for sure weakened. And our goal is that eventually they'd be gone. Suddenly in this 6th stage, all of our actions are selfless. All of our insights have to do with otherness and oneness, the union. And so what happens is that this prevents other mental conditions, right, from leaking or trying to come in, because we are focused on selfless action and action which is insightful. And how I interpret insightful action is that it's informed by my yielding my will to the will of the divine. And sometimes that's a moment by moment or split second by split second decision. So wonderful that in the 6th stage towards spiritual illumination, here's what happens with my prayer life, my time in silence, my time of meditation and contemplation. I will know that I am in the 6th stage because prayer and meditation becomes easy, blissful, and spontaneous. Wow, aren't those 3 great words? Those for me are 3 great words that I consciously integrate into my meditation and prayer life, knowing that the 6th stage will mean that prayer and meditation is easy, blissful, spontaneous. And so you can see, I'm going to go back to something I said in my introduction, that in the last 18 months of the shift on planet Earth, one of the biggest gifts for me has been the decision and the opportunity to dedicate as many times during my day to coming apart a while, as the Jesus Master, Christ mind in us calls us to. And so, wow, pay attention. I pay attention to how easy, blissful, or spontaneous prayer meditation is for me. Because if it is, then I can notice I'm in the 6th stage of God realization. As this 6th stage of God realization increases, my soul awakens through successive steps. Now, the Eastern philosophy does not outline, prescribe, or list what these successive stages of final awakening are. And, maybe you're wondering like I do sometimes, what are those successive stages of spiritual awakening, of finally awakening and being awake, alive, aware all the time? Well, perhaps they're not mandated. Perhaps they're not outlined and prescribed because they're individual, because it's part of our business again, because I need to be 100% responsible for those successive stages. So if I have indeed established that I can dispassionately observe the universal drama, right? What in Unity we sometimes call the mortal mind, the material realm. If I can, dispassionately move towards observing that, then perhaps I've successfully moved through any final stages that my soul needed to successfully move through before experiencing complete, total liberation from the small self. How does that feel? Liberation, that is complete, total awakening. And this is really what those of us who come together in truth circles, in new thought circles, in Eastern philosophy circles, and certainly in unity centers, we come together in order to build our commitment to, dedication to, and decision to yield our will to the will of God so that we would be guided in moving through successfully and successively through the 7 stages of illumination. So at the end, I'm going to talk to you about the final stage just briefly. I'm not there. I'm thinking any one of us is called to decide to get there. And the final and 7th stage is living in unbroken, continuous state of enlightenment. I guess that's when we don't forget ever that we are a lamp through which the light of God shines. And so here is a test. I think, the teacher dies hard in me. And so I think, wow, what's a good test? Maybe you know somebody like I do. I'm really grateful, blessed every day of my life to have an enlightened person that I can go to as a mentor, as someone to hold my hand or guide me or reassure me. And so here's a test that comes directly from the Eastern tradition for, I suppose, assessing how close I or any of us might be to enlightenment. And the test is, how do I relate to the mundane realms of life? How am I doing that? How and what am I doing in response to, in receiving, in understanding mundane realms is their words. Do you know what? Those are really strong words, because you might just look at mundane like I did the first time I ever read this. And I thought, okay, so mundane is boring. It's not interesting. Guess what, folks? Something mundane keeps showing up. It keeps showing up. It repeats in my external circumstances, in outer appearances. When I'm enlightened, I will always know that it's coming there and happening again for me. It's not happening to me. It's happening for me, so that from this new way of responding and relating to those realms, I will see the gift. I will understand what my soul, it has come to grow through, what karma I may be clearing, what relationships I may be embracing and loving in a new way. So that's the test for enlightenment, to notice how I'm relating to every aspect of my outer that is mundane. Some of the symptoms are that all of my actions are spontaneously appropriate. I'm just knowing what to do. I'm just doing it in an appropriate way. Because during this phase, this last stage of enlightenment, our realization of God, right? Our noticing that we're living in the presence all the time is no longer restricted by even the purified sense of the small self, of the ego. That ego sense, I mean, it's there, right? But it's just a viewpoint from which to, as I said in the introduction to the seventh stage, the purpose and the sole function of that ego sense when a person is enlightened is to dispassionately observe the universal drama, which as long as we're showing up in this spacesuit, let's face it, there will always be universal drama. There will always be the collective unconsciousness custom made just for our soul. So there we are. There's 5, 6, and 7. Before I just make some closing observations that came through me about these 7, I'm just going to, in case anybody's with us today who was not here for the first 4, I'll say all 7, okay? So the first stage is unconsciousness. That's pretty easy. The second stage is dysfunctional self-consciousness. The third stage is functional self-consciousness. The fourth stage is superconsciousness. The fifth stage is cosmic consciousness. The sixth is God realization. And we spent just a few minutes on the last stage of illumination. I'd like to close this morning by bringing our attention back to Psalm 138:8 in its translation in the King James translation. The Lord will perfect that which concerns me. And so I show up awake, aware, and willing to take 100% responsibility for what concerns me, for staying in my business, not yours or God's. I remember to laugh. I remember to wear my life loosely as a garment. And perhaps the Eastern philosophy that we spent 3 Sundays on together, the philosophy which informed the founders of the Unity movement, the philosophy of Eastern thinking, which is 5,000 or 6,000 years old, depending on where you go. Perhaps the 7 steps which they have gifted us will allow us to keep our vision focused where it needs to be in order to keep moving towards illumination. And our vision needs to keep looking within at our inner landscape, to keep looking within. I thank you. I thank you for letting me be the student as well when we come together every Sunday. For truly I am